Hi and welcome to Let's Talk About Cities, a podcast dedicated to making complex topics in architecture and urban design more accessible. Today's episode is an interview we made with Santosh Kumar, a practicing architect, educator and researcher. He's the founder of the studio Ketham's Atelier Architects and NGO Thinking Hand.
First, Santosh explains his background and how he came to found an NGO, and then gives his view on the state of sustainable design before providing an insight into his PhD work on the topic of flooding and floating cities. As we live in Sweden and Santosh in Austria, we had to conduct the interview over Zoom. Therefore, the audio quality unfortunately isn't the best, but we hope you will still be able to appreciate the content. I'm Katarina.
And I'm Matthias. We hope you'll enjoy today's episode. Let's talk about cities.
We're really happy to have you here, and we're happy that our ways have crossed and that you are our very first person that we can interview for the podcast.
It's first and foremost, I would like to say thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be on the show. You're on your show, wonderful show. I've been listening to your podcast. I think it's a wonderful thing you're doing. So I think it's a great start. I don't know how you started. I would love to know it. What motivated you do this one? Because I know how tough it is to do this kind of activities because you don't get any money or, it's all the satisfaction, the knowledge you're finding.
I think what you just said is that what drives you to do your work is also, it started out as a hobby, and we're obviously coming out from the professions that we studied and like that Matthias studied architecture and I urban design. I think it's just this interest to learn more, and then also a really great platform to invite someone like you and to, we studied, but we're not experts in flooding cities, for example. We will dive deeper into that. And then I think it's nice to just continuously learn. And also, I always feel like when I can explain a topic to someone who's not studied urban design, for example, then I have also really understood it because I managed to explain it in a way that also people who didn't study it understand. And I think that is kind of the thing that I'm interested in, to break it down into easily understandable topics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's also, I think, probably the feeling of we're learning a lot when we study and when we practice, and we realize that it's important things that we learn and we want to share them with people outside of the profession. And for that, you have to try some way, whether it's a podcast or a blog or a practice or as you are doing with the Thinking Hand, to teach and to spread that knowledge.
Absolutely. I think I totally agree what you're saying. The reason why I started NGO, it was like a strong start, I would call it, because when I was teaching in schools as a guest faculty, I've seen like a lot of students struggling a lot because the amount of students we have in one school is enormous.
Mm-hmm.
I can't blame the universities also because they have their own issues, the kind of funding they have. I think it's very complex to kind of explain, but where the government doesn't have that much money to sponsor or do scholarships or do some kind of more funding for the universities. At the same time, students also paying fees, I think,
mm-hmm.
which is also pretty high. And when you get into the schools, it becomes tougher because the number of students are pretty huge. And faculty, you have one or two or three people, handling 80, 120 students in a classroom. It's very difficult. So me going as a guest faculty, is my time is a very short time, spending a few hours. And when I was there, because I studied in India and I was studying in Europe and I came back. So there was always excitement in the students to learn from the people who go out because you have more exposure. And I got a chance to meet all the great architects like Zaha Wolf Briggs, Statler Printer, you name it, Ali Rashid, Greg Lenin. So you keep on like Peter Cook. So it was a great opportunity for me to even Tom Main also. I think meeting them was pretty impressive, and not just in the sense like because I'm seeing them. I think the kind of the methodology they teach, the kind of explanation they do. So I always have a feeling that why can't I share the same thing to students or the colleagues or the friends? So I had an opportunity to meet this, and I was trying to show whatever I can with the students. So what happened is like when you have this much amount of the students, then you need to give more time. So as a faculty, I have a very less time to be there, and I just started my practice. So in this process, like when I was talking to a lot of students, I was just going for I think almost 3 schools, and I was spending like 3 hours. So when student asked me like we need more time, like how can you help us, like if students are asking a lot of questions. Then I thought like then I took the students to be whenever I get a time, like I said like why don't we meet in a cafe, because in the school we can't do it anymore. I can't do more because there's the next class going and people have to move. And I don't have a time to stay there. I have to figure out another time to give them. So I was meeting them in parks, sitting in a park and doing it. I was taking them to the cafes, like 20 students, 15 students, depends, like in the groups. So I was teaching them in that and sitting there for hours. Like, just imagine like you're sitting for hours in a coffee shop with 15 students and how strange it is. Like, the person who is the waiter is like really straight. What are you doing? Like, you're drinking one coffee and staying for hours. Like, so we had to find another place. And, after one school, second school happened, and, the other school started contacting me. Like, could we meet you? And, could we talk? I was like, okay, this is getting really big now. And, people want to talk and people want to discuss about architecture. So then I decided, like, why don't then I took an office space and I kind of bought for rent. And then meanwhile, I was registering my office. I started that. Then I thought, why don't my friend also was discussing? I said, like, I want to start kind of making these workshops. And somebody suggested me, I think my brother, somebody said, why don't you start like an NGO? Then we started. What could be the name? Because we are thinking and we're going with your hand. So why don't Thinking Hand? Because all the ideas, what you generate in your head translates to your idea and it goes to the hand. Because we are designers and we are architects. So why don't we give that name? So that is where it started. It took me almost 6 months to register because registering an NGO in India is very tough. And then we registered and, we started with workshops. And now we almost 13 workshops going under one. Then within the process, we also started international competitions. Then we started talks. Then we started exhibitions. So one by one added to it. It's been almost like 6 years now. And it's wonderful to see like how we have around 50 people working as volunteers. And within that, they are coming from different backgrounds. I think most of them are from architecture students. Some of them are from economics. Some of them are more into psychology. So every workshop we're doing, and we had people coming into the picture. Like now, I think from Europe also we're getting some emails and phone calls, and this we would like be part of it.
Yeah, I was just thinking that it's on the one hand it's very interesting that you can bring the perspective that you have gained in Europe and also studying under some very well known and great architects back to India, but it's also very interesting to be able to do it the other way around.
Absolutely. And I think it's always fortunate to come to study in Europe or US because very less number go out to study. I think even I come from a normal middle class family, lower middle class family. I was kind of, I would say, lucky at the same time, really working hard. Then I did my master's in Gawante. So it was a great experience to learn these things. I didn't come to do masters just for a degree. I came here to get an exposure because the way you think, the way you kind of imagine, the kind of motivation you get, the knowledge you get from these schools is enormous. And I always say to European students also that I think European students are more lucky, I would say. People ask me why, how, and that's always a question. Because where I come from, getting an education itself is very hard. And compared to US and Europe, we don't have that great fact. And you have to really struggle. And, you have to travel a lot. I travel for hours to reach my university because there are very few schools to study. And I think I tell European students is that you don't have any problems. And the problem is you don't have any problems. So only thing is you need to solve them. In our case, we have problems and we need to face the challenges. So somewhere I think it's always in your head, like you have to really work hard. So even same case with the projects. On top, you have so many principles. I have my own principles to good architecture, like how to do. Because when you learn from the schools, when you go out, and what you implement is two different factors. There's education and practice. There's a huge gap. And I always want to fill that gap with what I learned from the universities. How you solve it's always very, very interesting. It's always challenging. So through the office, we kind of doing that, I would say. With the NGO, we kind of empower, share, and educate people. Especially more focus is on urban poor because they are lacking a lot. And they need a lot of support. And we get a lot of support from them because we work with them, kind of have this, the kind of inspiration they have. They work hard, even though they don't have anything, but still they have to work. So somewhere I think that is also motivating back to us. So that's how we run our NGO and the studio together. So I think it's both go hand in hand. The research innovation, what we do, we share it with NGO and the NGO shares with the communities. So the communities again help us to do more things.
I want to build the bridge to one of the focus, like a focus that you have in your research now, which is also climate change and the consequences that come with that. And as you now said, you've studied in India, but you also studied in Austria. Now you're teaching in Austria sometimes, and you're doing your research. And how do you, in your perception, how has the academic discourse changed throughout those years when you studied in India or also Austria to today? Also in your teaching experience when it comes to climate change and potential solutions through architecture and urban design?
Okay, that's a wonderful question actually, and I think there are two sides of it, I would call it. One side is like in India, I think we are still not ahead as Europe or America. We have our own curriculum, and we have to follow the curriculum. And somewhere I feel like the number of years, we have this 5 years course, bachelor course, and we have all the subjects covered. And for me, that itself looks like 5 years is more, but that's not enough for studying architecture or design because it's so much that you can't learn in this few years. And it's a lifelong learning process. And I think even I would say students also need to learn from outside, not just from the academic. The self-learning is more important than the university's teaching. And there needs to be a lot of exposure to in terms of books, in terms of the work going on outside. And already in India, a lot of crisis going on in terms of urban population, too much construction, materials. I think somewhere there is always this climate crisis and the material crisis. But I think somewhere we, as an architects, forgot to identify that. I think somewhere now I feel like architecture has and the design has changed more, like I would call it as stent, like how you have a heart problem, then you try to put a stent to it, and it's not a permanent solution. If you have a heart attack and you go to a hospital and they put a stent, and it's not a permanent thing; it's a temporary. I think that is what's happening with the cities and architecture. Somewhere I feel like we lost the basics because I go to a lot of schools as a guest and critic, and I think sometimes we fall into this computerized world and this too much digitalization. I think I'm not saying you should not use computers or tools of technology, but I think the that's a secondary tool. That could not be a primary tool.
Mm-hmm.
I think design has to evolve from various other aspects. Like, you need to know the basics. For example, you need to know how to draw. You need to know how to, translate your ideas onto the paper. So I think it's inside, outside, and outside, inside. Somewhere I think that is missing. Like people thinking in the schools, what I see in it's my opinion. People think twisting forms, turning forms, having this superstars influential architecture on students, and they think like that is architecture. I think that's really harmful for cities. Like I think I always question myself, like all the star architects have the idea, which are really they have their style. Like for me, style is not architecture. I think style is one which fits with the climate, the lifestyle of the climate style, like how the climate is changing here. So one of the reasons I would more is there is no climate responsive architecture. In terms of schools, I think we're in this whole the curriculum. I think the curriculum has to change as per the situations. We need to bring awareness about the climate crisis. We need to bring awareness that we are not losing the quality of spaces we're creating just because we are trying to focus more on the climate. And there's always we fall into this category of what do you call this? If you go into that direction, you forget the other direction. There are many directions. I think you need to be very careful about thinking about all the points, and still we are not sure. Like that's why I say, like every line. I think I wrote to myself a quote. Like it says, every line you draw should have a meaning to it, which means it's not just the drawing; it's a metaphor. Like so, I do tell the students and try to motivate them. And the same thing when I come to European schools. When I come to European schools, I think again there is a lack of basics in some things. Like for example, if I'm talking about historic buildings, they don't have much knowledge of it. If I'm taking a reference, if I'm giving a project reference to a project, they don't know about it. I'm not talking about young architects or superstars like recent times, but I'm talking about old teachers, old architecture. I think history is a very important thing in architecture because it tells you where we are missing, where we made faults. I think somewhere I think that is kind of missing. And again, I think it depends on school to school, like it's teaching with the students. But I think students are also very eager to learn. And yeah, I think the students visited to India, seen the place of India. We're building this classroom. So students get to know the place well. So they never seen the place before. They got a cultural shock that they got to know how people behave, the climate, and the food they eat, the material available. I think somewhere they're more conscious, like they're seeing on site, seeing, feeling it, and I think they had a wonderful experience when they're doing this. I think this is what is very important. I think sitting in a studio, doing something, going out there, seeing, studying properly on the ground, the local level. So that is what I feel kind of missing. At the same time, I think it's always a learning process. There's so much to learn.
It's interesting that you mention also the vernacular architecture of India, and perhaps that is an issue in Europe in a way that it's such a cosmopolitan culture that there isn't much focus put on the vernacular. Europe is more the continent of the cities of the Industrial Revolution and what has come since then. But what was before is seen as the countryside, and most people move to the cities and don't really concern themselves with the countryside. So that's a sort of lost history in a way. But what I also wanted to ask, as you have the experience from Angewandte and from these architects that also have studios there, is what approach there is there, or what approach there was, at least during your time there. How much is climate change discussed, and how much are these vernacular solutions discussed, as what tends to come out of these studios that are at a very high level is oftentimes quite also form-driven and technological.
I think when I was studying, I was not really thinking about climate change because I was not aware of this. And for me, I think architecture I was in this kind of phase where the learning process, and nobody talked about it. And, and there's always like, seeing all these architects is like, getting inspiration and doing things. But when I studied in the studios, I think, again, the studios are depend on the professors. Like they have this kind of agenda, and then you have to fulfill that requirement. What I meant is like, apart you doing that, at the same time, you need to also have a second thought. Like, what is you inside? Like, what you want to do? What kind of practice I want to do? How if I'm teaching, what should I do? So that was one part. Like, then when I went back, and when I was traveling, after finishing, I was traveling also, and reading more things, sketching, trying to understand more architecture. Like, that's where when I went and see the problems in India, I think then I realized, like, just the form making is one part, I think, which is very important, but there are other parts. Designing is one. I think in 100% for me, design is 1%. There are 99 other things which are very important. And before that, you need to have that knowledge, you need to have that experience. And that is where I think every individual needs to think about. It's not the schools what teaching. It's not the professor who's telling you something. Or, I think it's you, how you are contributing, how are you adding value to your cities is very much important. And I think for me, that is very important. The contribution to the society is very important. And for me, I think not doing architecture is better than doing a bad build or doing bad architecture. Not building itself is an architecture. The moment when you build something, I think it's built for next 100 years. And I'm telling you, I wrote my own self some codes, like which I really, really follow and try to adapt as much as I can. If you fail to design one good building, it affects 3 generations. And if you fail to design good urban planning, it affects next 100 generations. Mm-hmm. So I think what kind of design are we doing? How we are speculating? How are we understanding things? And how are we act, react, and reflecting? It's very important. I think I'm not saying that I'm the perfect, but I'm trying to. I'm trying to rectify myself, correct myself, because nobody is perfect, right? So it's always a learning process, keep on trial and error methods. That's the only way. And you make mistake and you don't repeat the mistake. It's very important. If you're doing mistake unknowingly, it's okay. But if you're making the same mistake, then there is some problem. Mm-hmm. I think there are a lot of architects who just do it because they are crisis, because they have to run the show, they have to run their office. And it's especially I have my own friends in India. I think they do architecture for what client wants. The architect wants to do a lot of things, but he can't do it because of so many other reasons. So you have to compromise himself. And there is a big shift now. I think even studying architecture is only becoming for the rich people. It's not a common man course anymore. And the crisis, not much work for architects. All over the world it's going. And I think doing on top, you have so many principles to do good architecture. I think you hardly have any project. So it's very complex, and I think everybody's struggling. Mm-hmm. That's the way only we can survive and do something good. Mm-hmm. And that's what we studio follow. Like we don't do much project. We do a lot of speculative designs and this thing. We design and this thing. Most of the projects were like that. Client doesn't have budget, but still we don't lose hope.
Because you mentioned speculative design now, can you maybe explain for our listeners what that is and how you work with speculative design in your NGO, and also it's central in your research, as I understood?
I think what we follow, from very beginning, we don't know what we're doing as a speculative design in the very beginning. For me, speculative design is what if scenarios, not just the solutions, but kind of gives you a further options, I would call it, and see how can you make things better. And for me, that is very important, which can be a catalyst, which can make to rethink the cities. In this collective approach, what we try to do is you do collective research, because you bring in people to be part of it, where you do studies like case studies. And the second part is collectively speculate in terms of designing. So in this, what we try to do is like students follow Atelier, but we're joining these workshops where the 10 different architects from different fields, like different backgrounds, in India and Europe, were collaborating together, trying to see what are the possibilities. And we did go to the sites, we did a documentation. So what we're trying to understand is put things together and see what can be done. So in this 2-3 day workshop, what we tend to understood is like instead of one brain working, it's like 100 brains working, 200 hands working together, coming up with I think, amazing solutions and amazing ideas together. So we can have an option to choose in a later stage. So then this work will be further taken into the exhibitions to display for the audience, people from other backgrounds, especially local politicians, who visit and see this kind of exhibitions and learn from it. Like, these are the options. It's not just one person is taking a decision, have an idea, and one person is deciding and doing everything. I think when you do this collective approach, I think there's more transparency. Yeah. There is more clarity in it. And there is always responsibilities also, good or bad. I think it's on us as a whole team. So that is, for me, it's very important in developing cities. I think now the architecture and urban design has become more like consultants, more, I think it's becoming a corporate. I think what I'm trying to say is like now the cities are not being designed by architects anymore or urban designers. This is the companies like Siemens or, all these superstar companies are on. They're not direct, but they're indirect. And architects are becoming as a consultant. If we can bring this kind of collective approach, I think things can change and, things can improve a lot. I know it's hard to, maybe there are a lot of questions how we bring in these people. It's very tough, but if you fail to bring these people on one page to do things, then when it goes to longer time, it becomes very difficult. It's very complex, and we can't solve situations.
Yeah, there for sure is a change in the role to be seen, and I think how you explain speculative design could for sure be a concept or like a tool how to, as you say, collectively design something and therefore bring out better solutions in the end. So that's fantastic. Thank you.
We just have to, I think, move to climate change a bit.
Yes.
The main topic.
Exactly, because now you also talked about your research a bit, because you also write about, or you mentioned speculative design as a approach within your research, and then you also talk about flooding cities a lot. Yes. And within your paper, you wrote that sea level is one reason that we are faced with flooding cities. And in fact, 300 million people are affected by flooding cities. Maybe you can outline what impacts flooding has on cities and which places within the world are especially affected.
And I think it would also be interesting if you told us and the listeners how you came to research that specific topic.
I think it's very, very interesting. I think this flooding cities is no more speculative anymore. It's already happening. It's not happening in 1 year, or it's already happening, and we are part of it. And Asian cities are going to be one of the most affected, as per the studies show. I think Europe is also in a big trouble, and also in US. I think if I say New York, Miami, Boston, Mumbai, Kolkata, Shenzhen, Jakarta, there is list goes of Tokyo. And in this thing is why coastal? Because they are on the edge, and due to the climate change and because of the ice sheet melting, you have this high level of rain and floods coming in, and cities are getting high level amount of water. And in my research, what I am trying to deal with is with two different cities. One is Mumbai and one is Hyderabad. Why Mumbai and Hyderabad? There is a reason. So why Hyderabad? Because I come from Hyderabad, which is my city. And why Mumbai? Because it's one of the fastest growing city in the world. And it generates almost $2.2 trillion, which is equal twice the GDP of Mexico and Australia. And what we're giving back to the city is very little. You're getting money, but how much you're investing? And people try to move the city, Mumbai city, to Navi Mumbai. Somewhere I think people didn't move anymore. Even people are going in Navi Mumbai, I think the people who are in Mumbai are getting more. Mm-hmm. It's no more reducing down. I think for me it's very important because how we are culturally rooted, how the inhabitants see their work, they're living there from decades, they have their families, their work is there, and their all of the emotions and the family background. So I think there's no chance they're going to move. So everything is interconnected. The moment when you talk about environment, the flora and fauna, the kind of the land it has, like all the topsoil goes, all the kind of this thing goes into the ocean, the salt water takes it. And there is a Methi river within Mumbai. It's also one from the industrial, whatever it is, being dumped directly, which is not filtered in. It directly goes not just the river, but also oceans. In this case, what happens is like, this mixture of industrial waste, this kind of water getting really worse. At the same time, cities are spending more money. You will ask me how. This thing, one, people have already built the structure, right? They invested a lot of money. When the flooding happens, it takes away your thing, which means whatever you build is gone. So, second is you clean. It costs a lot because you're cleaning a whole city. It's not a small amount of money you're investing. And you're rebuilding again, which means you're spending 3 times. The moment when you spend 3 times amount, so how much impact you have in your economy is really affects. And at the same time, it goes to the political. And the political party says that we would like to do this and this. And the government doesn't have a funding because they already invested so much. There are a lot of projects ongoing also. So this is like, interconnected with each of the things. And the social life fabric is also destroyed. Transportation is kind of the last year I'm talking about 2020. Maybe you've seen some videos on this. It was so devastating in Mumbai and Hyderabad that even the hospitals, like there's a hospital called JJ Hospital, the water was in the hospital, literally. And that was in the time of COVID. Can you imagine the situation? You already have a big problem of COVID. It's a disaster. And on top of this flooding is another disaster.
It's a catastrophe.
It's a catastrophe. And people don't have words to say. They don't know what to say. Everybody's in a numb position. Like, everybody can't help everybody. Like, it's like a complex situation. And what can we do in this situation? It's a big question mark. I think the first question I didn't ask to others, but I asked myself, what am I doing? What is my contribution? Even though I come from Hyderabad, Mumbai is not even close to me, but it's my city, it's my country, right? And it's the same case with the other countries also. So the role of an architect has to change. The role of the thinking has to change. And the schools, academics, institutions have to think about this. And even the political parties need to think about it. I think even a person who's living locally has responsibility for it. Because climate didn't change in an overnight, right? It happened from centuries. And we're all responsible for it. So I think as an architect, I am super responsible for it. I think that is one of the reasons is why I've taken this topic. Because again, I need to go back to the Hyderabad because there's a connection there. So when we're doing studies for this communities, when I'm doing this Thinking Hand engineering, we wanted to go and do for slum for neglected. And there was a huge rain in 2018. And we went to this place and, it was so devastating. And they have in the slums, like, they hardly have space. And they are in this few stones with a cover and that's it. And they have some utensils and that's it. And this rain takes away everything. They have a small hope. And I always have a question to myself. See, I have a family. I am good enough. I am well educated. and I have things in my hand which I can do. And they don't have anything, but still they have a hope. So that was like running in my head, and and I have my team now. Why don't we do something? At the same time, the University of Innsbruck was doing research on this at the same time. So that was, I was invited for that to be part of this project. I was part of this project. I was talking about Mumbai and the Jakarta zone. And Hyderabad has lost, because in Hyderabad we have lakes and we have Musi River. And the Musi River was built again because of the flooding, because there was an engineer who wants to build this. Somewhere, like whenever it rains, we don't have a proper drainage system, and the lakes are enclosed. Where the water goes, it comes to the city. So these cities are getting really complex, and there is a traffic issues, there is a electricity problems, there is a health issues. People are dying. What happened in 2020 was devastating. Even the same thing, what happened in Mumbai also happened in Hyderabad. And a lot of people lost their life, especially the urban poor who are living in this low-lying area.
So the idea came from that situation with the flooding, but also realizing what you spoke about earlier, that the sea is actually polluted and the waterways are polluted. So it doesn't quite make sense to continue with the land reclamation. Therefore, it's logical to push the buildings up, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's the origin of the floating
one of the reasons, I would say, like, this is not the ideal, I would say, solution. This is one of the solutions. And a lot of people ask questions like, it's very expensive. And absolutely, I think even I was trying to work with what existing material we have. We can build with the steel and concrete, whatever it is. But making a platform, it's possible. Like, doing architecture on top would be designed, and it has to think about how are we affecting ecology and how are we affecting the marine ecosystem. And there are other challenges also. And I would say, like, land reclamation is one of the problem, because you're bringing the land from somewhere else, right? You're bringing the sand, the construction investment you're doing, and there's no guarantee that what you have done there is going to stay there, because the setting time takes time. The amount of material you need is enormous. So the local ecology and the ecosystem changes based on that, because you're adding something new to it. And building on top will not solve your problem, because the water is rising. You can't add in your land, keep on adding. And people also question me, like, why don't they retreat from there? Again, the question is, people don't move from that place because they belong there. And retreat is not a solution. And there is one drawing I made for the paper, maybe seen it, in that, like, what the UN is thinking about it. I think you can make it still, and you can still, there is another option, traditional way of architecture. It's also kind of floating. It's not just floating, it's a buoyancy. And that's also possible. That's also an option we have. And there's another option we have, floating platforms. Mm-hmm. So there is a traditional methodology, there is a technology what we have. I think it has to go hand in hand, come up with the new ideas. So one of the reasons why I'm trying to bring the speculative design, I think city has to be thought in a holistic way. Yeah. And it has to start, I would say, it's a local at a community level, and it has to go to global. And the global go to the local. So for example, when you do workshops with the local architects and this thing, you can always bring in the outside architects, because they're thinking, right? They're speculating together. So we can work together and we can think about these issues and come up with the probable possible strategies and scenarios, and then put back to the global platform, give it to the people there. And I think you can get back again from that. So it has to be in a two-way process instead of going a singular process. Mm-hmm. And that's where I think the speculative design and the land reclamation, these things has to be well thought of. And it has to be in a community, a decentralized way, not a centralized way.
More people are being aware that climate change is happening and we can feel the consequences. And I was quite shocked to, in the documentary Climate Change, Living on the Water, you said that Jakarta, the capital of Indonesia, will have to think about, or they will have to find solutions because they have such severe problems with flooding. And then I Googled a bit about it, and I read that Jakarta it sinks between 5 and 10 centimeters every year. And that was due to sea level rise, but also overuse of groundwater. That number was so shocking to me. And now I was wondering, how will they manage? And because you said they have to think about eventually moving the whole city or to move the capital out of Jakarta. How will they do that?
I think it's even I don't have an answer for that right now.
Yeah.
Because yes, this Jakarta is sinking because they tapped all the groundwater and the land has become so porous and the ocean water is penetrating. And, it's kind of sinking because you're taking out some, destroying the whole city. And, I think I've seen some pictures, like even the Prime Minister house was in flooded. So just imagine how the situation is. And this has to be well thought of. People living on water is not new. It's already there. Because the moment when we say floating architecture, it's like, something new. People are living. In Indonesia, people were living on water, in the boats, houses. Even India, Kerala, if you go, there are boats, people live on this. And I think even if you see Venice was also flooding now. I think people are living on this thing. I think what we need is we need to come up with the new strategies. We need to come up with the new ideas. And coming back to the Indonesia, Jakarta, they have to, I think it's already late somehow, but moving the whole city would be really expensive. And I don't think Indonesian government has that much amount to do that as a funding. And the moment they start building a new place, there's no guarantee that the city going to survive or the city going to run the same way what they're thinking about. And I think they have to come up with the adaptive plan. They have to start thinking about how they're going to deal with this. Maybe the floating architecture could be one option.
Yeah.
Maybe building on a stilt could be another option. And coming up with the new strategies would open up new doors.
Yeah, because moving the city or moving homes seems like a very short-term solution. And then maybe you're right that we have to rethink and really work with the flooding and have ideas on we offer a long term how we can design in a way that it's adapted to this consequences of climate change. And maybe floating structures are a possible solution. But as you said before, of course, they're right now quite expensive. And then we are in a pandemic now. Many people are suffering from poverty even more than before. And then, of course, it will be a question of who is it accessible for and how to build that amount of floating structures. And then again, it probably has an impact on the whole ecosystem living under the water. So as you said, it's not a perfect solution, but it might be something to consider.
And in a way, moving the whole city is just a larger scale version of what you described as retreating. So it's not the best idea. But I'm thinking as well, going back to what you said at the beginning about vernacular architecture, vernacular building, and especially also as you mentioned that in Indonesia and in India, people already do live on the water. So there's a wealth of knowledge there that could be harnessed. And even the slums, as you spoke about the slum specifically as an affected part of the city when floods do occur. I did my bachelor's project in Dharavi and stayed there for a month. So I remember from that time some bits and pieces. And one thing I found interesting is, which is the case for all slums in the world, basically, is that they tend to be self-built. Sometimes they are upgraded over time, of course, but at its basis, they are self-built. So there could be something to harness there, to not make it too large scale, but to harness the knowledge that does exist and actually involve the people, which you spoke about before.
I totally agree. I think there are some few points you pointed out, like one about especially Agumpura think I've been to Arabi quite sometimes, visiting the place, going around. Sorry, not only just come, but I was visiting all of the slums. And I think the situations where they go through, and a lot of people try to move them out. A lot of people try to move them out, put somewhere else, and they build that new housing for them, and like low income group or middle income group, whatever they try to build outside, and they never want to go because there is no life there, and because the whole work is there. Like all the slums have, they recycle everything. They have this self-employed, and they work in their small space what they have, and they kind of change the space in different ways and within time, space, and activity. And if you're taking out that, there is no life, and they have to commute to come to this place for hours. Like if people are staying, they're given outside of the Mumbai, and they have to cover 2 to 3 hours to come. Who will commute for 3 hours in that time, the energy, and the money you're putting in? There is no life. So eventually, what they do is like whatever they offer, they say yes, and they come back to the solution. The growth has increased. I think in Mumbai they have every month, every day. I think they have come 1 million people or 2 million people inside. Most of them who don't go out because they want to have a job, and their livelihood is there. And I think a lot of projects try to go. It's not going to work. I think you have to build within the slums, then taking out the slums. There is an options like the investors who buy for the property, who run the business in Mumbai are not just from Mumbai and India, but they are from outside the company for investing. I think there's a possibility that if they can build this floating platform, invest in that. Same time, they kind of, for example, like they generate energy out of it. New ideas. Like there is. I met recently in Vienna Biennale. I was listening to this lecture. His name was Antonio Scorpio. And he was doing this, it's called, he's doing an urban farm where the farming happens based on the urine. And it's kind of aquaponic method, and he's using the rooftops for storing this plant. Like, in urban places, you have only rooftops, right? So he's putting this containers, and he's kind of having this idea of making this new urban farming in these places, and he's trying to use indoor facades for growing the new ideas how you grow things. Like, similarly, I think all these ideas could be brought onto this floating platforms, and I think people have also big question about this question mark of sustainability, which I totally understand, because that has become sustainability was already there. I think this name is coming new because made something new, right? So people are selling products out of it in the name of bio, in the name of nature, natural, and this thing. I think it's very important. Sustainability is already there from centuries. I think how we use it, and before that, we need to have this speculative design. So I think there are a lot of options, and I think there's interesting book Angelika Fitz. It's called Critical Care. There's a very interesting book. They have done a lot of case studies. I think one they're talking about the Venice project. They mentioned about they're talking about Pakistan, Bangladesh, Africa. I think maybe the floating school in Africa. They're trying to build this. So there are already good examples. In Bangladesh also they made this community space which is also flooding it in Mumbai. Sorry, in Bangladesh, which was also a very interesting project to look at it. And the architect, what they did, he built the whole of this complex under the ground, digging down. So what he created, he kind of created a mound outside, and what he created is like the whole water goes, and it's kind of a bund you're creating outside and you're building inside. I think it's a very interesting project. I think maybe you can check that project. I think that is a very interesting project. And also the Pakistan Sindh flood rehabilitation project is one. Then I think then if you look at Alexander Arvana, what he did for the Chile project, there the whole city was kind of flooded. They have to redesign the whole thing. They were talking to the fishermen. It was so complex project, but still, I still remember I was listening to his lecture. He mentioned that they have to think about how to supply water in that conditions to the people. So what they did is like, they have this tube where kids play. Maybe you're young, maybe you've seen this. But they fill this tube with the water bottles, and the kids were kind of following this wheel and giving these water bottles to the community. Mm-hmm. So they have to come up with the ideas to serve the people. And I think the architect role has changed. I think we have to think beyond architecture. Mm-hmm. In some cases, we have to cut down the projects which are not relevant, which is relevant. We have to put money in that. And I think we have to revisit on how things should be made. And that is very crucial in making cities. I know we don't have budget. I know there is a crisis, but still we have to come onto the common grounds and give priority to what we need. And I think that's where I always say, academics play key role. At the same time, the practice plays key role. And the people are very important in building and participating in doing projects.
Yeah, that was a very good, I think we have to come to an end. And I think it was a great end, actually, because you had you were giving such fantastic examples, what is already happening. And I think it's, when I speak about climate change, it often gets very depressing. And I think it's always nice to end with something where you actually mention so many good examples. And we don't, as planners and architects, we don't have to reinvent the wheel all the time. We can also look at what is already there and build upon that. And I think that was a fantastic end.
I would like to thank again. It was a wonderful end. This thing, I think this topic has to be discussed more often. I think it's not just in a schools or kind of lectures, but I think this has to go into the people. It's how we can reach more and think about in more collective way and make good sustainable cities, more egalitarian cities. So that's what I would say. And let's keep doing it from your podcast. We do it from our NGO, Thinking Hand NGO, and the Ketham's Atelier.